Happy birthday, now get out. Those 5 words destroyed 68 years of my life in one cruel sentence. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to speak my truth. My name is Lorna. I turned 68 on a gray Tuesday afternoon in Chicago, in the same house where I'd celebrated every birthday for the past 32 years. The wallpaper in the hallway still showed the pencil marks where I'd measured Daniel's height as he grew. The kitchen counter bore the coffee ring stains from decades of morning conversations with my late husband, Frank. I'd spent the morning arranging fresh daisies in the blue ceramic vase that Frank had given me on our first anniversary. My arthritic fingers moved slowly, deliberately, placing each stem just so. The familiar ritual brought comfort, even though no one would be coming to see them. The house felt enormous that day. Every room echoed with memories that seemed to mock my solitude. In the living room, the worn leather armchair where Frank used to read his newspapers still held the impression of his body. I'd refused to let anyone sit there since his funeral 3 years ago. I wore the blue cardigan Daniel had given me for my 60th birthday, the soft cashmere one that still carried the faint scent of his cologne from when he'd hugged me that day, back when his hugs felt real, when his smile reached his eyes, when he'd call me Mom instead of letting Natalie speak for him. By 6 p.m., my phone had received exactly one message. Happy birthday, Mom. We're all busy today. Let's talk on Sunday. Sent by Natalie, my daughter-in-law, not even from my own son. I stared at those words until they blurred. Busy. On my birthday. Too busy for a phone call. Too busy for the woman who had given up her teaching career to raise Daniel. Too busy for the grandmother who had spent her savings on their children's private school tuition. I set the dining room table for one, using the good china. The wedding set with tiny roses that Frank and I had saved months to buy. The fork was slightly bent from years of use, just like me. I made chicken pot pie from scratch, Daniel's favorite since he was 7 years old, even though I knew he wouldn't come to eat it. The kitchen filled with the rich aroma of butter and herbs, and for a moment, I could almost hear Frank's voice. Smells like heaven in here, Lorna. I could almost see Daniel's teenage face, eyes lighting up as he'd steal bits of crust before dinner. But the kitchen was silent except for the old refrigerator's hum and the tick of the wall clock that had counted every lonely hour since Frank's death. At 9:45 p.m., just as I was wrapping the untouched pot pie, the doorbell rang. My heart leaped like a schoolgirl's. Maybe it was them. Maybe Daniel had come after all. Maybe the kids were hiding behind the bushes with a homemade birthday card. Maybe Natalie had been planning a surprise all along. I hurried to the door, smoothing my cardigan, checking my reflection in the hallway mirror. My silver hair was still neat in its usual bob. My lipstick, the coral shade Frank had loved, was still fresh. I opened the door with a smile that felt genuine for the first time in months. It was Natalie. She stood on my porch with her arms crossed, her designer jacket zipped tight against the October chill. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless even at this late hour. She didn't step inside, she didn't smile back, she didn't even look me in the eyes. Happy birthday, she said, her voice flat as roadkill. But you really need to stop this. Stop what? I asked, my smile faltering. The cold air was seeping through my thin nightgown, but I barely noticed. This clinging, the dinners you keep making for us, the showing up at Emily's school events, the calling to check on the kids. You're smothering us, Lorna. I'm sorry, but it has to stop. Each word hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't been showing up unannounced. I hadn't been calling daily. I had called once last week, once, to ask if Emily liked the sweater I'd knitted for her during the long, quiet evenings. We need space, Natalie continued, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. You've had your life, your time. Now let us have ours. Focus on yourself for once instead of trying to insert yourself into every moment of our lives. She paused, tilting her head with the practiced look of someone delivering a kindness. So please, get out of our way. Then she smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that made my blood freeze. Happy birthday. Now get out. And with that, she turned, walked down my porch steps, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing there in my nightgown, The birthday I'd hoped for crumbling around my feet like autumn leaves. I stood in that doorway until my legs gave out. Then I sat on the cold hardwood floor, right there by the entrance, and stared at nothing for what felt like hours. I couldn't cry. I didn't have the energy left for tears. I just whispered into the empty house, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you. I just wanted to love you." The words echoed back at me, hollow and broken. That night, sleep never came. The morning after Natalie's visit, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. My hands trembled as I opened the old photo album I'd been avoiding since Frank's funeral. The leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and the pages crackled like autumn leaves as I turned them. There was Daniel at 3, chocolate cake smeared across his chubby cheeks at his birthday party. I remembered saving for weeks to afford that party. The clown, the decorations, the mountain of presents. Frank had worked double shifts at the factory, and I'd taken on evening tutoring jobs to make it special. Daniel at 7, missing his 2 front teeth, grinning in his Little League uniform. I'd driven him to every practice, every game, packed hundreds of peanut butter sandwiches for team snacks because other mothers said they were too busy to contribute. Daniel at 16, in his graduation cap, arm around my shoulders. Behind that smile, I remembered the arguments about college tuition. "It's too expensive, Mom," he'd said. "Maybe community college first." But I wouldn't hear it. I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the one she'd worn on her wedding day, to cover his first semester at Northwestern. Daniel at 25, the day he brought Natalie home. She'd walked through my house with calculating eyes, commenting on the quaint furniture and outdated kitchen. Even then, I'd pushed down the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. Love was about acceptance, I told myself, about welcoming new family. I turned the page and found the hospital photos from when Emily was born. I was there before Daniel arrived, holding Natalie's hand through labor while she screamed at the nurses. "Where's my husband?" she'd gasped between contractions. "He was closing a deal," he'd said. Business couldn't wait. But I could wait. I always could wait. The next page showed Christmas morning 3 years ago, the last one Frank was alive. Emily and Caleb were surrounded by presents, their faces glowing with joy. What the photo didn't show was the credit card debt I'd hidden from Frank. The gifts had cost more than our monthly grocery budget, but seeing their excitement had felt worth it. "You spoil them," Frank had whispered to me that morning, but his eyes were smiling. "Someone should," I'd whispered back, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. I flipped further and found the receipt tucked between pages. The one from when I'd paid for Daniel and Natalie's honeymoon to Europe. "Just a loan, Mom," Daniel had promised. "We'll pay you back once the promotion comes through." That was 8 years ago. The promotion came and went. The money never did. My fingers traced over a photo of myself at Emily's first dance recital last year. I was the only grandparent there, clutching flowers I'd bought with my grocery money. Daniel was on his phone in the lobby, and Natalie was complaining about the uncomfortable auditorium seats. But Emily had run to me afterward, her little arms wrapping around my waist. "Did you see me, Grandma? Did you see my pirouette? You were perfect, sweetheart," I'd told her. And I'd meant it. In that moment, every sacrifice felt justified. I remembered the parent-teacher conferences I'd attended alone, because Daniel and Natalie were swamped at work. The school plays where I was the only audience member for my grandchildren. The soccer games where I cheered from the sidelines while they attended business dinners. My mind drifted to last month's phone call. Caleb had gotten sick at school, and the nurse couldn't reach Daniel or Natalie. So they called me. I'd driven 40 minutes in rush hour traffic, picked him up, and spent the afternoon feeding him soup and reading stories until his fever broke. When Natalie finally arrived that evening, she'd barely thanked me. Instead, she'd criticized the medicine I'd given him. "Next time, just take him to urgent care and call us later," she'd said, as if my loving care was an inconvenience. I closed the album and walked to my bedroom, where I kept the box of financial records. The manila folder felt heavy in my arthritic hands as I spread the papers across my bed. Receipt after receipt told the story of a grandmother's devotion. $15,000 for Emily's private school tuition when Daniel claimed they were temporarily short. $8,000 for Caleb's therapy sessions after his learning disability diagnosis. $12,000 for the down payment on their SUV because the kids needed something safer. $6,000 for the family vacation to Disney World that I wasn't invited on because it's really more of a nuclear family thing, you understand. Then there were the smaller expenses that added up like drops filling a bucket. Birthday parties I'd funded, clothes I'd bought, groceries I'd delivered during Natalie's difficult pregnancies, the babysitting, hundreds of hours of free childcare while they went to dinners, movies, weekend getaways. I'd kept meticulous records, not because I expected repayment, but because Frank had taught me to track our finances. Every penny matters when you don't have many, he used to say. Looking at those numbers now, I felt sick. Not because of the money I'd spent, but because of how little appreciation it had earned me. I remembered the conversation I'd overheard at Emily's birthday party 6 months ago. I'd gone to the kitchen to refill the punch bowl and heard Natalie talking to her sister. "She's getting more clingy every year," Natalie had said. "Always wanting to be involved, always offering help we don't need. It's like she doesn't have her own life. Maybe she's lonely," her sister had suggested. "That's not our problem," Natalie had replied. "Daniel's too soft to set boundaries, but someone has to. We can't have her thinking she's part of every decision we make." I'd stood frozen by the punch bowl, the plastic ladle trembling in my hand. Part of every decision? I wasn't part of any decisions. I was just the bank account they withdrew from when convenience required it. That night, I'd gone home and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. When had I become invisible? When had my love become a burden instead of a gift? I thought about the hours I'd spent listening to Daniel complain about work, about money, about Natalie's moods, how I'd offered advice that was dismissed, comfort that was barely acknowledged, how I'd rearranged my own life around their needs while my own dreams gathered dust. I'd wanted to travel with Frank before he got sick. We'd planned a trip to Ireland, where his grandparents were born. But then Daniel needed help with the house down payment, and Emily needed speech therapy, and there was always something Caleb needed. Frank had never complained, but I'd seen the travel brochures he'd kept in his desk drawer, edges worn from handling. After he died, I'd found them with a note in his handwriting. "Someday, when the kids are settled." Someday never came for Frank. Now, sitting in our empty bedroom, surrounded by evidence of my financial devotion and emotional invisibility, I whispered the question that had been growing in my heart for months. Was I used? The words hung in the air like an accusation I couldn't take back. But once spoken, they felt true in a way that made my chest ache. I wasn't their mother. I wasn't their grandmother. I was their ATM with a heartbeat. And the worst part? I'd trained them to see me that way. I'd handed over my money so readily, my time so freely, my love so completely, that they'd learned to expect it without question. I'd made myself indispensable to their comfort while becoming completely dispensable to their hearts. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and for the first time since Natalie's visit, I began to cry. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the harsh, body-shaking sobs of a woman who'd finally seen herself clearly. I cried for the teacher I'd been before I became a mother, for the dreams I'd deferred until they died of neglect, for the marriage that had been beautiful but overshadowed by children who took everything and gave nothing back. Most of all, I cried for the woman I'd been before I learned to measure my worth by how much others needed me. Outside my window, Chicago hummed with evening traffic, people going home to families who saw them, valued them, loved them for who they were rather than what they could provide. I was 68 years old, and I was invisible, but not for much longer. The days after my birthday revelation crawled by like wounded animals. I found myself paying attention to things I'd been blind to for years. The subtle cruelties that had become so normal I'd stopped noticing them. "Wednesday morning," Emily called. My heart lifted hearing her sweet 8-year-old voice until I realized why she was calling. "Grandma, Mommy says you have money for my gymnastics camp. She says to tell you it's really important for my development." My throat tightened. "Did Mommy tell you to call me, sweetheart?" She wrote down what to say on a piece of paper. "She said you'd understand about investments in my future." 8 years old, and already being taught to see me as a resource to be tapped. I closed my eyes, imagining Natalie coaching my granddaughter on which words would pull at my heartstrings most effectively. How much is the camp, Emily? Mommy says $3,000. She says you always help with important things. $3,000 for a week-long camp. More than I spent on groceries in 4 months. But it was Emily asking, and her voice was so hopeful, so trusting. I'll think about it, sweetheart. Mommy says thinking means no. She says if you really loved me, you'd just say yes. The manipulation was so blatant, it took my breath away, using my granddaughter as a weapon against my own heart. That afternoon, I drove to my doctor's appointment alone. The mammogram results I'd been anxious about for weeks were ready. Dr. Peterson, who'd been my physician for 15 years, delivered the news with gentle relief. Everything looks perfectly normal, Lorna. See you next year. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt a strange disappointment. If there had been something wrong, would anyone have come? Would anyone have held my hand, driven me to treatments, sat with me during the scary moments? I remembered when Natalie had her appendectomy 2 years ago. I'd taken vacation days from my part-time job at the library to help with the kids, cooked meals for 2 weeks, cleaned their house while she recovered. When she was discharged, she'd complained that the flowers I'd brought weren't the right color for her bedroom decor. Now, sitting in my car outside the medical building, I realized I'd been facing my own health scares alone for 3 years. Since Frank died, no one had ever asked about my appointments, my test results, my fears about aging in this body that was slowly betraying me. Thursday brought another small cruelty. I'd made Caleb's favorite cookies, the ones with chocolate chips and walnuts that took me 3 hours to bake from scratch. My arthritic hands ached from the mixing, but his joy was always worth it. When I arrived at their house, Natalie answered the door but didn't invite me in. "Oh, Lorna, Caleb's at a play date. He won't be back until late." "I could wait," I offered, holding up the container of warm cookies. "Actually, we're trying to cut back on sugar. Doctor's orders. Maybe next time call ahead?" She took the cookies anyway, I noticed. They'd probably be gone by tomorrow, eaten by adults who couldn't be bothered to let me see my grandson's face light up when he tasted them. Friday brought the phone call that changed everything. I was sorting through mail when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my bank's number. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Jennifer from First National. I'm calling about some unusual activity on your account. There's been a large withdrawal from your savings account that wasn't initiated by you." My blood turned to ice water. "What kind of withdrawal?" $50,000, transferred to an account belonging to Daniel Morrison. The authorization appears to be legitimate, but given the amount, we wanted to verify with you directly. The room started spinning. I didn't authorize any transfer. I see here that Daniel Morrison was added as a joint account holder 3 years ago. Do you remember signing those documents? I did remember. Frank had just died, and Daniel had insisted I needed help managing my finances in my emotional state. I'd been drowning in grief, overwhelmed by insurance paperwork and funeral arrangements. He'd made it sound like protection, like loving care. "Mrs. Morrison, are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "Can you tell me when this transfer occurred?" "Yesterday afternoon. Would you like me to freeze the account until you can come in to discuss this?" After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen chair and stared at the wall for an hour. $50,000. My emergency fund. The money I'd saved in case I needed long-term care, in case my health failed, in case I became a burden on anyone. But I already was a burden, wasn't I? An inconvenient burden who could still write checks. That evening, I drove to Daniel's house without calling first. For once, I was going to be the one showing up unannounced. Natalie answered the door wearing a new dress I didn't recognize. Something expensive-looking with a designer label visible at the neckline. "Lorna, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I know," I said, pushing past her into the foyer. "Daniel, I need to speak with you." Daniel emerged from the living room, his face flushed. Behind him, I could see boxes, electronics, what looked like a new sound system, shopping bags from high-end stores. "Mom, what's wrong? You seem upset." "The $50,000, Daniel, from my savings account, the money you took without asking me." His face went pale, then red. I was going to tell you. It's an investment opportunity. A sure thing. I'll pay you back with interest." "An investment in what?" I gestured toward the boxes. "New toys, new clothes, A shopping spree? It's not like that, Natalie interjected. Daniel's starting a consulting business. These are business expenses, tax write-offs. Business expenses, I repeated slowly. Like the dress you're wearing? Like the new electronics? Daniel's shoulders sagged. Mom, I'll explain everything. It's complicated, but no, I said quietly. It's not complicated at all. You stole from me. It's not stealing, Natalie snapped. It's your son. Family helps family. And it's not like you were doing anything important with that money anyway. You just let it sit there. Just let it sit there. My security. My peace of mind. My protection against an uncertain future. It was nothing to them. Just money sitting there, waiting to fund their latest desires. Where are Emily and Caleb? I asked. Upstairs, Daniel said. Mom, let's sit down and… Call them down. I want to see them. They're doing homework. Maybe another time would be… Call them down, Daniel. Something in my voice must have cut through his excuses because he called up the stairs. 2 pairs of feet thundered down, and suddenly my grandchildren were there, and my heart broke all over again. Emily hugged my legs. Grandma, did you bring cookies? Not tonight, sweetheart. Caleb, now 10 and trying to be grown up, gave me a shy wave. Hi, Grandma. Mom said you might not come around as much anymore. The words hit me like a slap. She said what? That you're getting older and might want to rest more. That we shouldn't bother you with little kid stuff. I looked at Natalie, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. They were already preparing the children for my absence. Already spinning the narrative to make my eventual disappearance seem like my choice, my failure, my inadequacy. I love little kid stuff, I told Caleb, my voice thick with unshed tears. I love everything about you two. Then why don't you come to my soccer games anymore? He asked. Coach always asks where you are. I hadn't been told about any soccer games. When are your games, honey? Saturdays at 10. We've had 4 games. I scored 2 goals last week. I looked at Daniel, who was studying his shoes. 4 games I'd missed because no one had told me they existed. I didn't know, I said simply. Daddy said you were too busy, Emily added. He said you had important grown-up things to do. The lies. The manipulation. The systematic erasure of my place in their lives while my money remained welcome. I knelt down and hugged both children, memorizing the feel of their small bodies against mine, the smell of Emily's strawberry shampoo, the way Caleb's hand felt in mine. I love you both so much, I whispered, more than you'll ever know. When I stood up, I looked directly at Daniel. I want every penny back in my account by tomorrow, and I want to be removed as a joint account holder. Mom, you're overreacting. We can work this out. Tomorrow, Daniel. Or I call the police and report it as theft. Natalie's mouth fell open. You wouldn't. Try me. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. And I want to know about every soccer game, every school event, every moment in their lives that you think I'm too old or too inconvenient to attend. They're my grandchildren, not your possessions. I left them standing there in their foyer, surrounded by their ill-gotten purchases, their faces shocked that the family ATM had finally grown a spine. That night, I sat in my empty house and made a decision that would change everything. I was done being invisible. I was done being used. And I was done measuring my worth by how much others could take from me. The woman who had raised Daniel, who had sacrificed everything for his happiness, who had bent herself into impossible shapes to earn love that would never come, that woman was disappearing. In her place, someone new was being born. Someone who remembered what it felt like to matter. Someone who was ready to reclaim her life. The phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. I let it ring. By 7:15, there had been 12 missed calls, all from Daniel. I made my coffee slowly, deliberately, savoring the quiet morning ritual that had sustained me through so many difficult days. Outside my kitchen window, Chicago was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbling down the street. Neighbors walking their dogs. Children waiting for school buses. Normal life continuing while my world shifted on its axis. The voicemail started after the 15th unanswered call. Mom, please pick up. We need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Please don't do anything rash. Rash. After 35 years of patient motherhood, one night of standing up for myself was rash. By 10 a.m., Natalie was at my door. She looked different than she had the night before. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her makeup hastily applied. She was wearing jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt I recognized as one I'd bought for Daniel in college. "Lorna, we need to talk," she said, not waiting for an invitation before pushing past me into my living room. "Good morning to you too, Natalie." She turned to face me, and I was surprised to see something that looked almost like panic in her eyes. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. Daniel's been up all night. He's so upset. He loves you, you know. We all do." I sat down in Frank's old chair. The first time I'd claimed that space since his death. It felt strange but right, like putting on a coat that was finally warm enough. "Show me," I said simply. "What?" "Show me that you love me. When's the last time any of you did something for me without expecting something in return?" Natalie's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. We invited you to Christmas dinner last year, where I cooked the entire meal, brought all the groceries, and cleaned up afterward while you complained that the turkey was too dry. That's not— You offered to cook. You insisted. Because you said you were too stressed to handle it yourself. And when I offered to just bring dessert instead, you said that wouldn't be enough help. The color was draining from Natalie's face. "Lorna, you're twisting things, making them sound worse than they were." "Am I?" I reached for the manila folder I'd left on the coffee table. "Let's talk about the money, Natalie. The $50,000 Daniel took from my account. He was going to tell you." "When? After he spent it all? After I found out from the bank?" I opened the folder and pulled out the bank statement. "This is my emergency fund. The money I saved in case I get sick, in case I need long-term care, in case I become the burden you seem to think I already am." Natalie's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape. "It's not gone forever. Daniel's business will pay it back with interest. You'll actually make money." "But what business, Natalie?" "The consulting firm that exists only in his imagination. The one he's been starting for 3 years now while working his regular job." She sat down heavily on my couch, her facade beginning to crack. "Things have been tight for us. Really tight. Daniel's boss has been making noises about layoffs, and with the kids' expenses and the mortgage and— So you decided my financial security was less important than your comfort." "That's not how we saw it," she said, but her voice was getting smaller. "You don't have dependents. You don't have the same pressures we do. The casual dismissal of my needs, my fears, my right to financial security in my old age. It took my breath away." "I see," I said quietly. "Because I'm alone. Because Frank is dead. Because I don't have children at home anymore. My money is just available for you to take?" "We weren't taking it. We were borrowing it. There's a difference. Without asking, without my knowledge, without any paperwork or repayment plan. That's not borrowing, Natalie. That's stealing." She started crying then, big, dramatic sobs that might have moved me a month ago, but now I could see them for what they were. Another manipulation. Another tool in an arsenal I was finally learning to recognize. "Please don't call the police," she whispered. "It would destroy Daniel's career. The kids would suffer. Emily's starting to make friends at school, and if this got out, always about them, always about their comfort, their reputation, their needs." "Where are the children now?" I asked. "With my mother. Daniel thought it would be better if we talked alone first." Of course he did. Keep the children away while the adults figured out how to manage the inconvenient grandmother who'd suddenly developed boundaries. At noon, Daniel arrived. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually neat hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. He sat down next to Natalie on the couch, and suddenly I could see them clearly. Two people who'd built their comfortable life on someone else's foundation and were panicking now that the foundation had started to shift. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry. I should have asked first. I should have explained the situation better." "What situation, Daniel?" He ran his hands through his hair, making it stand up at odd angles. "I made some bad investments last year. Lost a lot of money. And then Natalie's car broke down, and we needed a new roof, and Emily's therapy bills." "Emily's in therapy?" Just some anxiety issues, normal kid stuff. But insurance doesn't cover much, and what kind of anxiety? When did this start? Why wasn't I told? Daniel and Natalie exchanged a look that felt like a knife between my ribs. We didn't want to worry you, Natalie said. It's really more of a family matter. She's my granddaughter, but she's our daughter, Daniel said quietly. We get to decide who's involved in her medical decisions. The exclusion was so complete, so deliberate, it left me speechless. My granddaughter was struggling, and they'd decided I didn't have the right to know, to help, to be present for her pain. How long has she been in therapy? 6 months, Daniel admitted. 6 months. Half a year of my granddaughter's suffering, and I'd been kept in the dark while they helped themselves to my money to pay for treatment I wasn't allowed to know about. I want to see the children, I said. Maybe that's not the best idea right now, Natalie said quickly. They're confused about all this tension. We don't want to upset them further. They're not upset about the tension, I said, standing up from Frank's chair. They're upset because you've been systematically removing me from their lives while telling them it's my choice. That's not. Caleb asked me why I don't come to his soccer games anymore. Emily was coached to call me asking for gymnastics camp money. You've been using them as weapons against me while poisoning them against me. Daniel's face crumpled. Mom, it's not like that. We needed some space to figure things out as a family. I am family, Daniel. I gave birth to you. I raised you. I sacrificed my career, my dreams, my financial security for your happiness. I am not some distant relative you get to manage and manipulate when convenient. You're right, he said suddenly. You're absolutely right. God, Mom. What have we done? For a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he was scared, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world, who used to draw me pictures and sign them, "Love, your son Daniel." But then Natalie shot him a sharp look, and his face hardened again. But you have to understand our position too, he said. We're trying to build a life, and sometimes we need help. That's what family does. They help each other. When have you helped me, Daniel? The question hung in the air like smoke. He opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. When Frank was dying, who sat with him during chemo treatments? You did, but when I had my knee surgery 2 years ago, who drove me to physical therapy 3 times a week for 6 months? I was traveling for work, and when I fell last winter and couldn't get up my front steps with groceries, who helped me figure out how to manage? We didn't know you fell, Natalie said weakly, because I learned not to bother you with my problems. I learned that my needs were inconvenient. My struggles were burdens. My pain was something to be managed rather than shared. I walked to the window and looked out at my neighborhood, the houses where other families lived, other grandparents who might be welcomed rather than tolerated. Here's what's going to happen, I said without turning around. The money will be returned to my account by 5 o'clock today. Every penny. Mom, that's impossible. Then you'll figure it out. Sell whatever you bought with my money. Take out a loan. Ask Natalie's parents for help. I don't care how you do it, but it will be done. And if we can't? Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. I turned to face them both. Then I call the police at 5:01. Daniel's face went white. You wouldn't destroy your own son's life over money. You destroyed my life for money, I said quietly. Fair is fair. They left 20 minutes later, Natalie's sobs echoing in my empty house long after their car had pulled away. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily called. Grandma? Her voice was small, scared. Daddy's crying and Mommy's yelling at someone on the phone about money. Are you mad at us? My heart broke all over again. Oh, sweetheart. I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you. But Mommy says you don't want to see us anymore. She says we make you tired. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of their manipulation. Even now, even in crisis, they were using my grandchildren's emotions as weapons. Emily, listen to me very carefully. I will always want to see you. You and Caleb are the most important people in my world. If anyone tells you differently, they're not telling the truth. But then why can't you come over? Why does Mommy say you're too busy for us? Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart. Big mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt. Like you? Yes, honey. Like me. I miss you, Grandma. I made you a picture, but Mommy said you probably wouldn't want it. I want it more than anything in the world. At exactly 4:47 p.m., my bank called to confirm that $50,000 had been deposited back into my savings account. But something had changed permanently. The money was back, but my innocence was gone forever. I finally understood what I really was to them, and I was ready to become something else entirely. The morning after I got my money back, I woke up for the first time in 3 years without checking my phone immediately. No voicemails to return, no crisis to manage, no family emergency that required my instant financial or emotional response. I lay in bed and listened to the silence. It was terrifying and beautiful. For so long, my worth had been measured by how quickly I could solve other people's problems, how readily I could open my wallet, how completely I could erase my own needs to accommodate theirs. Now, with my phone silent and my calendar empty, I had to face a question I'd been avoiding for decades. Who was I when no one needed anything from me? I made coffee in my favorite mug, the one with the small chip that Frank used to tease me about. "Just throw it away, Lorna," he'd say. "We can afford a new one." But I'd loved its imperfection, the way it fit perfectly in my hands despite its flaws. Maybe because of them. I sat at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of things I wanted to do, not things others needed me to do, not obligations or responsibilities or family emergencies. Just wants. The list was embarrassingly short. Visit the Art Institute of Chicago alone, take a painting class, read mystery novels without interruption, see a movie in the middle of a weekday, buy flowers for myself, sleep until 9 a.m. without feeling guilty. 68 years old, and I could barely fill half a page with my own desires. When had I become so small? That afternoon, I did something that felt revolutionary. I turned off my phone. Not silent. Off. The anxiety was immediate and physical. What if Daniel called? What if there was an emergency with the children? What if someone needed me and I wasn't available to be needed? But I forced myself to breathe through the panic. I forced myself to remember that for 6 months, they'd managed Emily's therapy without involving me. For weeks, they'd managed Caleb's soccer games without my presence. They'd proven they could live without me quite well when it suited them. Maybe it was time I learned to live without them. I walked to the Art Institute, taking the long route through Grant Park. The October air was crisp, and the trees were showing off their final burst of color before winter stripped them bare. I couldn't remember the last time I'd walked anywhere without purpose, without a destination that served someone else's needs. At the museum, I stood before paintings I'd loved in college but hadn't seen in decades. There was Nighthawks by Edward Hopper, that lonely diner scene that had once made me feel melancholy, but now felt like a meditation on the beauty of solitude. I studied the faces of the people in the painting, each lost in their own thoughts, together but separate. And I realized something profound. Being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. I spent 3 hours wandering through galleries, reading every placard, sitting on benches to really look at paintings instead of hurrying past them. No one was checking their watch, wondering when I'd be finished. No one was complaining about tired feet or hunger or boredom. I could move at my own pace, linger where beauty called to me, skip what didn't speak to my soul. It was the most peaceful afternoon I'd had in years. That evening, I called Mrs. Chen, my neighbor who'd been Frank's chess partner. She was 73, widowed for 5 years, and had been gently trying to befriend me since Frank's funeral. "Lorna!" Her voice was warm with surprise. "How lovely to hear from you. How are you doing, dear?" I'm having a strange week, Margaret. Could I possibly come over for tea? I could use some company." "Of course. Come now, I just made scones." Margaret's house was the mirror image of mine, but it felt completely different. Where my space had become a museum to memories, hers was alive with color and activity. Plants thrived on every windowsill. Books were stacked on tables, bookmarks protruding like small flags marking her progress through multiple stories. Classical music played softly from a radio in the kitchen. "You look different," she said, studying my face as she poured tea from a pot covered with a cozy her grandmother had knitted. "Lighter somehow." "Do I?" I accepted the delicate china cup, noting how Margaret used her good dishes for everyday tea, not saving them for special occasions that might never come. "What's happened? You've seemed so burdened lately, like you were carrying weight that wasn't entirely yours." The kindness in her voice, the gentle observation from someone who'd been watching from a distance with concern, it opened something in me that had been locked tight for months. I told her everything: the birthday humiliation, the stolen money, the systematic exclusion from my grandchildren's lives, the years of financial and emotional exploitation disguised as family love. Margaret listened without interruption, her face growing more troubled with each revelation. "Oh, my dear," she said when I finished, "you've been living in an abusive relationship." "It's not abuse," I protested automatically. "They're my family. They love me. They just—" "Lorna," Margaret's voice was gentle but firm, "when someone takes your money without permission, that's financial abuse. When they isolate you from relationships, including your relationships with your own grandchildren, that's emotional abuse. When they manipulate you into believing their needs are more important than your basic dignity, that's psychological abuse." The words hit me like cold water. Abuse. I'd never thought of it that way. Abuse happened to other people, in other families. Abuse was dramatic and violent, not subtle and gradual like the erosion of my boundaries over years of small compromises. "But they're not strangers," I said weakly. "They're my son and daughter-in-law." "Some of the worst abuse happens within families," Margaret said sadly, "because we're conditioned to forgive family anything, because we tell ourselves that blood relationships automatically mean love, even when the behavior proves otherwise." She refilled my cup, her movements calm and deliberate. "Tell me, when was the last time any of them did something kind for you without expecting anything in return?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't. Every interaction in recent years had been transactional. My time, money, or emotional support in exchange for brief access to the people I loved. When was the last time they asked about your health, your dreams, your fears, your happiness? Again, silence. When was the last time they treated you like a person with your own needs rather than a resource to be managed? The tears came then, not the harsh sobs of the night before, but quiet tears of recognition. Margaret handed me tissues without comment and let me cry. "What do I do?" I whispered. "They're all I have." "Are they? Really? Or have you just believed that for so long that you've stopped looking around to see what else might be possible?" That night, I did something I hadn't done since Frank died. I ran a bath and stayed in it until the water got cold. I lit candles. I used the expensive bath salts I'd been saving for a special occasion. I let myself soak in hot water and silence until my muscles relaxed and my mind quieted. When I got out, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. Not just the quick glances while brushing teeth or fixing hair. I saw a woman who was tired but not broken, older but not finished, hurt but not hopeless. I saw a woman who'd spent so many years focused on other people's needs that she'd forgotten she had a face, a body, a life of her own. "Hello, Lorna," I said to my reflection. "Nice to meet you." The next morning, I woke up at 9:15 a.m. Not because I'd set an alarm, not because someone needed something, but because my body had decided it was ready to face the day. I made pancakes. Real ones, from scratch, with blueberries from the farmer's market. I ate them slowly, savoring each bite, reading a mystery novel between forkfuls. The protagonist was a tough old woman who solved crimes by paying attention to details everyone else ignored. I liked her immediately. At 10:30, my phone rang. Daniel. I looked at the caller ID for a long moment, then did something that felt revolutionary. I let it go to voicemail. Then I turned the phone face down and went back to my book. The protagonist had just discovered that the butler wasn't the killer after all. For the first time in 35 years of motherhood, someone else's crisis was going to have to wait until I finished my chapter. And you know what? The world didn't end. The house didn't collapse. The sky didn't fall. I finished my pancakes, solved the mystery. It was the seemingly innocent neighbor. And only then did I check the voicemail. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Maybe we could all sit down together this weekend? Work out a better arrangement? The kids miss you. Call me back. The kids miss you. Not "I miss you," or "we were wrong," or "we're sorry for stealing from you and excluding you from your grandchildren's lives." Just the tactical deployment of my grandchildren's emotions to ensure my compliance. I deleted the message. Then I did something that 6 months ago would have been unthinkable. I called the bank and asked them to remove Daniel as a joint account holder on all my accounts. "Are you sure, Mrs. Morrison?" the banker asked. "This will mean he'll no longer have any access to your funds." "I'm absolutely sure," I said, and meant it. That afternoon, I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center, beginning watercolors for seniors. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 68, I was finally allowing myself to be a beginner at something, to be bad at something, to learn something just for the joy of learning. The instructor was a woman about my age named Susan, with paint-stained fingers and eyes that sparkled when she talked about color and light. "Art isn't about perfection," she told our small class of nervous beginners. "It's about paying attention. It's about seeing the world in a new way. It's about giving yourself permission to play." Permission to play. When was the last time I'd played? When was the last time I'd done something just because it brought me joy? I painted a terrible watercolor of a flower that day. The petals were uneven, the stem was too thick, and the leaves looked more like blobs than anything botanical. It was the most beautiful thing I'd created in years. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen looking at my awful, wonderful painting propped against the salt shaker, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in decades, I'd spent an entire day focused on my own experience, my own pleasure, my own growth. I'd spent a day living my own life instead of merely supporting everyone else's. And I wanted more days like this. Many more. I was 68 years old, and I was just beginning to bloom. 3 weeks after I started painting, Daniel showed up at my door unannounced. It was a Sunday morning, and I was in my garden, planting bulbs for spring flowers I might actually be around to enjoy. I saw him through the kitchen window as he walked up my front path, his shoulders hunched against the November cold. For a moment, I felt the old maternal instinct kick in. He looked tired, stressed, younger than his 35 years. But then I remembered the missing money, the excluded soccer games, the coached phone calls from Emily. I didn't rush to open the door. When the doorbell rang, I finished planting the last tulip bulb, brushed the soil from my hands, and walked slowly to answer it. There was no urgency in my movements, no automatic dropping of my own activities to accommodate his arrival. "Mom." He looked surprised to see me in gardening clothes, dirt under my fingernails, my hair covered by an old scarf. "You look different." "I've been gardening. What do you need, Daniel?" The directness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. The old Lorna would have invited him in immediately, offered coffee, asked about his day, the children, work. Anything to fill the space with warmth and avoid the uncomfortable reality of why he was really there. "Can I come in? We need to talk." I considered this for a moment, then stepped aside. But I didn't offer coffee. I didn't take his coat. I didn't automatically move to make him comfortable. "The living room is fine," I said, gesturing toward Frank's chair where I'd been sitting every morning to read. Daniel sat on the couch, and I noticed him taking in the changes I'd made. The family photos that had dominated every surface were gone, replaced by books, my watercolor supplies, a small plant Margaret had given me. The coffee table that used to be covered with grandchildren's drawings and family calendars now held my current mystery novel and a cup of tea that had gone cold while I was outside. "You've redecorated," he said, and there was something almost accusatory in his tone. "I've made the space mine," I corrected. He was quiet for a moment, fidgeting with his wedding ring. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, about everything that's happened. And I think maybe we've all been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe we said things we didn't mean. Maybe we can find a way to move forward that works for everyone." The careful language, the diplomatic phrasing, it reminded me of his work voice, the tone he used when negotiating deals that favored his interests while making the other party feel heard. "What exactly are you proposing, Daniel?" "Well, maybe we could set up some kind of schedule. Regular visits where you could see the kids but with boundaries that work for our family structure. And maybe we could discuss a more formal arrangement for when we need financial help, something with paperwork, payment schedules, that sort of thing. I stared at him, this man I'd raised, and felt something inside me crystallize into perfect clarity. You want to schedule my access to my grandchildren. It's not like that. And you want to formalize your ability to borrow my money. Mom, I'm making it sound exactly like what it is. I stood up from Frank's chair, and Daniel seemed to shrink into the couch cushions. You want to manage me like an inconvenient but necessary resource. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I intended. Let's talk about fair, Daniel. Is it fair that you took $50,000 from my account without asking? Is it fair that you've hidden Emily's therapy from me for 6 months? Is it fair that you've been telling my grandchildren I'm too busy to attend their lives? His face flushed red. We've been protecting them from what? From a grandmother who loves them? From the only person in their lives who's never asked them for anything? From the guilt trips? From the emotional manipulation? From feeling responsible for your loneliness? The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Emotional manipulation? Yes. The constant calls, the showing up with gifts they don't need, the making them feel bad if they don't want to spend time with you. It's not healthy, Mom. I felt the room spinning around me. Was this how they saw my love? As manipulation? As something toxic and unwelcome? When have I ever made those children feel guilty about anything? You don't have to say it directly. It's in your face when they don't react the way you want. It's in your voice when you talk about how lonely you are. It's in the way you buy them things constantly, like you're trying to purchase their affection. Each word was like a knife, precise and devastating, but underneath the pain, something else was rising. A cold, clear anger that felt cleaner than anything I'd experienced in years. I see, I said quietly. So when I give gifts, it's manipulation. When I express loneliness, it's emotional blackmail. When I want to be part of their lives, it's guilt-tripping. You're twisting my words. No, Daniel, I'm finally hearing them clearly. I walked to the mantelpiece where I'd kept a framed photo of Emily and Caleb from last Christmas. I picked it up, studying their faces. My granddaughter's bright smile, my grandson's gap-toothed grin. Tell me something, I said without turning around. In this new arrangement you're proposing, would there be room for me to have opinions about the children's lives? Would I be allowed to know about Emily's therapy, Caleb's soccer games, their school events? Well, that would depend on the situation. Would I be consulted about decisions that affect them? Or would I just be notified of the outcomes when my financial support is needed? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I thought so, I said, placing the photo face down on the mantel. Mom, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to find a compromise here. I turned to face him, and something in my expression must have been different because he actually leaned back. A compromise, I repeated. You steal from me, exclude me, use my grandchildren as weapons against me, and now you want me to be grateful for a compromise that gives me scheduled access to my own family. We never use the kids as weapons. Emily called me asking for gymnastics camp money with words you coached her to say. You told Caleb I was too busy to attend his soccer games. You've been preparing them for my absence while ensuring my money remained available. If that's not using them as weapons, what would you call it? Daniel's composure finally cracked. We call it protecting our children from a grandmother who doesn't understand boundaries. Boundaries? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'll show you boundaries, Daniel. I walked to my desk and pulled out a manila envelope I'd prepared that morning, knowing somehow that this conversation was coming. These are the documents removing you from all my financial accounts. You no longer have access to my money in any form. His face went white. Mom, you can't. This is a letter to my lawyer, instructing him to remove you and Natalie from my will. You're being vindictive. And this, I said, pulling out the final document, is a restraining order application. One more instance of you taking anything from me without permission. One more manipulation using my grandchildren. One more surprise visit to my home, and I'll file it. Daniel stood up so quickly he knocked over my teacup, sending cold liquid across the coffee table. I watched it spread toward my book and calmly moved the novel out of the way. You can't be serious. You'd cut off your own son over money? You cut off your own mother over money, I replied. The only difference is I'm being honest about it. The kids need you, No, they don't. You've made that very clear. They need my money. They need my free babysitting. They need my emergency financial support. But they don't need me. That's not true. Prove it. I stood facing him across the spreading puddle of spilled tea. When was the last time you called just to check on my health? When was the last time you asked about my dreams, my fears, my happiness? When was the last time any of you treated me like a person instead of a service provider? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The answer was written all over his face. I raised you better than this, I said quietly. I taught you about kindness, respect, love that doesn't come with price tags. Somewhere along the way, you forgot those lessons. We can fix this. No, I said, and the finality in my voice surprised even me. We can't, because you don't think anything needs fixing. You think I need to be managed, not respected. You think my love is manipulation. My needs are inconvenience. My money is your emergency fund. I walked to the front door and opened it, cold November air rushing in. I want you to leave now. Mom, please. If you want a relationship with me, a real relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, you know where to find me. But I won't be bought anymore. I won't be managed anymore. And I won't be used anymore. Daniel stood in my doorway for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words that might undo years of damage with a single sentence. The kids really do love you, he said finally. I know they do, I replied. That's why I'm doing this. So maybe someday they'll learn what love actually looks like. After he left, I cleaned up the spilled tea, made a fresh cup, and sat back down in Frank's chair with my mystery novel. My hands were shaking slightly, but underneath the tremors was something I hadn't felt in years. The solid ground of my own worth. That evening, Margaret came over with a bottle of wine. How did it go? She asked, studying my face. Terribly, I said. And perfectly. We sat in my kitchen and drank wine while I told her about the confrontation, about Daniel's shocked face when I refused to be managed anymore, about the restraining order paperwork that probably wouldn't be necessary but felt good to have. You know, Margaret said as we finished the bottle, I'm proud of you. For what? For probably destroying my relationship with my only child? For refusing to accept less than you deserve? For teaching him that love isn't about what you can provide, but about who you are? I looked around my quiet kitchen, at the watercolor painting still propped against the salt shaker, at the novel lying open to the page where I'd left the detective solving another puzzle. I think I might be okay, I said, surprised by the truth of it. For the first time in years, I think I might actually be okay. Margaret raised her empty wine glass in a toast. To being okay. To being more than okay. Outside, Chicago hummed with Sunday evening life. Families having dinner, children finishing homework, people living their ordinary, beautiful lives. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I might be ready to join them. 6 weeks after Daniel left my house in silence, I did something I hadn't done in 43 years. I booked a trip for myself. Not a family vacation where I'd cook, clean, and referee arguments while everyone else relaxed. Not a visit to relatives where I'd spend my time helping with household chores and listening to other people's problems. Just me, going somewhere I'd always wanted to see, for no reason other than my own joy. The travel agent, a cheerful woman named Rosa, who couldn't have been older than 30, looked at me with barely concealed surprise when I said I wanted to visit Sedona, Arizona. Alone, for 2 weeks. Are you meeting family there? She asked, fingers poised over her keyboard. No, I said, and the word felt like a small revolution. Just me. Any particular reason for Sedona? I thought about this. Why Sedona? I'd seen pictures in a magazine at my doctor's office, red rocks reaching toward endless blue sky, landscapes that looked like they belonged in dreams rather than on Earth. But the real reason was simpler and more profound. Because I've never been anywhere just because I wanted to, I told her. And I'm 78 years old. If not now, when? Rosa's expression softened into something like admiration. You know what? Good for you. Let's make this the trip of a lifetime. That night, I called Margaret to tell her about my travel plans. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. Lorna. Perfect timing. I just finished a crossword puzzle and I'm feeling quite brilliant. What's new in your world? I'm going to Arizona, I announced. When? Next month, for 2 weeks. Alone? Completely alone. There was a pause, then the sound of Margaret setting down what was probably her evening teacup. Lorna Morrison, she said slowly, you magnificent woman. Tell me everything. I found myself laughing, really laughing. Not the polite chuckles I'd perfected for family gatherings where my opinions weren't welcome. I don't know what came over me. I was at the grocery store, and there was this magazine with pictures of red rocks, and I thought, why not? Why not indeed? Oh, this is wonderful. You're going to have the most amazing time. What if I get lonely? What if I don't know what to do with myself? Then you'll figure it out, Margaret said with the confidence of someone who'd learned to trust her own resilience. That's what adventures are for. Discovering what you're capable of when you stop limiting yourself. The weeks before my trip passed in a blur of preparations that felt nothing like the anxious planning I'd done for family vacations. No one else's dietary restrictions to consider. No one else's schedule to accommodate. No one else's preferences to prioritize over my own. I bought clothes I actually liked instead of practical outfits that wouldn't show stains from grandchildren's sticky fingers. I researched hiking trails, art galleries, restaurants that served food I'd never tried. I bought a new journal with a cover that reminded me of sunset colors. 3 days before I was supposed to leave, Emily called. Grandma! Her voice was smaller than usual, uncertain. Hello, sweetheart. How are you? I'm okay. Mommy said you went away. My heart clenched. I'm still here, honey. I'm going on a trip soon, but I'm still here. But Daddy said you don't want to see us anymore. He said you're mad at us. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar surge of anger at how they continued to use my grandchildren as emotional weapons, even now. Emily, listen to me very carefully. I am not mad at you. I could never be mad at you or Caleb. You two are the most precious things in my whole world. Then why can't we see you? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her parents have made your love conditional on your willingness to be financially exploited? How do you tell a child that you've finally learned the difference between love and manipulation? Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, I said carefully. Sometimes those disagreements mean we need space to figure things out. But my love for you never changes. Okay? Never. I made you a picture, she whispered. For your birthday. But Mommy said you probably wouldn't want it. I want it more than anything in the world, Emily. More than anything. Can I mail it to you? Yes, sweetheart. You can always mail me pictures. You can always call me. You can always reach out to me no matter what anyone else says. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not for myself this time, but for 2 children caught in the middle of adult failings they couldn't understand. But underneath the sadness was something new. Determination. I was going to build a life worth living, not just for myself, but as an example to Emily and Caleb of what it looked like when someone valued themselves enough to demand respect. The flight to Phoenix was my first time on an airplane in 20 years. The last trip had been Frank's funeral, family flying in from scattered cities, everyone focused on grief and logistics, and the complicated choreography of loss. This time, I had a window seat and no agenda beyond my own curiosity. I watched Chicago shrink below me, then the Midwest spread out like a patchwork quilt, then mountains rise like promises of adventure. The woman next to me was about my age, traveling to visit her daughter. What takes you to Arizona? She asked. Nothing, I said, and then laughed at her confused expression. I mean nothing specific. I just wanted to see something beautiful. How wonderful, she said, and I could tell she meant it. I haven't traveled alone in years. I keep meaning to, but there's always something. There's always something, I agreed. The trick is deciding that sometimes you're the something that matters most. My hotel room in Sedona was small but perfect, with a balcony that faced the red rocks. That first evening, I sat outside with a glass of wine I'd bought because I liked the label, and watched the sunset paint the landscape in shades of orange and pink and gold that no photograph could capture. I thought about Frank, about how he would have loved this view. But instead of the sharp grief that usually accompanied thoughts of him, I felt something gentler. Gratitude that I'd had 32 years with a man who'd encouraged my dreams, even when family obligations made them seem impossible. I made it, Frank, I whispered to the desert wind. I finally made it somewhere just for me. The next morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I signed up for a guided hike with a group of strangers. Our guide was a woman named Sarah, about 40, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that crinkled from years of squinting into canyon light. She led our small group of 8 through trails that wound between towering red formations, with names like Cathedral Rock and Bell Rock. The Apaches believed these rocks held special energy, Sarah told us, as we paused at a vista point. They thought this was a place where you could connect with your true self, strip away everything that wasn't essential. I looked around at the massive stone sculptures that had been carved by wind and water over millions of years, their surfaces painted in layers of geological time. Something about their permanence, their indifference to human drama, was profoundly comforting. I can see why, said the man next to me, a retired professor from Denver. It makes your problems seem smaller, doesn't it? Not smaller, I found myself saying, more manageable, like maybe you're stronger than you thought. That afternoon, I visited an art gallery downtown. The owner, a woman with silver hair braided with turquoise beads, noticed me studying a particular watercolor, a landscape of red rocks against blue sky, painted with the kind of loose, confident brushstrokes I was learning to admire in my art class. Beautiful piece, she said, joining me in front of the painting. I'm just learning to paint, I told her. Watercolors. I'm not very good yet. Are you enjoying it? More than I expected. Then you're better than you think. Joy is the best teacher. I thought about my terrible flower painting, still propped against my salt shaker at home, and smiled. You know, the gallery owner continued, we have an artist who comes through here every few months, runs weekend workshops for people who want to paint the landscape. She'll be here next month if you're interested. I live in Chicago, I said automatically. So, people travel for art all the time. Some of our best workshop students come from far away. They say it frees them up, being in a place where no one has expectations about who they should be. A place where no one has expectations about who they should be. The phrase echoed in my mind as I walked back to my hotel. That evening, I called the workshop instructor and signed up for her November session. Another trip, another adventure, another step away from the woman who'd measured her worth by her utility to others. On my last night in Sedona, I hiked alone to a spot Sarah had mentioned. A small amphitheater of red rocks where you could sit and watch the stars emerge in the desert sky. The silence was complete, except for the distant call of coyotes and the whisper of wind through stone. I pulled out the journal I'd bought and wrote my first entry. I am 68 years old, and I am learning to be myself, not someone's mother, not someone's financial safety net, not someone's emotional caretaker. Just Lorna. Just me. Today I climbed rocks I'd only seen in pictures. I talked to strangers who became friends. I ate dinner at a restaurant where I ordered exactly what I wanted without consulting anyone else's preferences. I think Frank would be proud of me. I think the woman I was at 25, before I learned to shrink myself to fit other people's needs, would recognize who I'm becoming. I think I'm proud of me, too. When I returned to Chicago, Margaret was waiting at my door with a bottle of champagne and eyes bright with curiosity. Tell me everything, she demanded before I'd even set down my suitcase. So I did. I told her about the red rocks and the art gallery and the hiking group where I'd been just Lorna, not anyone's mother or grandmother. I told her about the workshop I'd signed up for and the way the desert silence had felt like coming home to myself. You look different, Margaret said, studying my face. Younger somehow. Freer. I thought about this. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 40 years and finally remembered how to exhale. And what's next? I looked around my house, the space I'd started to make my own, with my books and my art supplies and my plants. It felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. I don't know, I said. And for the first time in my adult life, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than fear. And I can't wait to find out. That night, I found Emily's drawing in my mailbox. A picture of a grandmother and granddaughter holding hands under a rainbow with "I love you, Grandma," written in careful 8-year-old letters across the bottom. I propped it next to my terrible flower painting and smiled. Some love was pure enough to survive any manipulation. Some connections were strong enough to transcend the failures of the adults who tried to control them. I was going to be okay. Better than okay. I was going to be free. 8 months later, on a warm June morning, I was in my garden when the doorbell rang. I was transplanting the roses Frank had planted for our 20th anniversary, moving them to a spot where they'd get better light, where they could bloom more freely. My hands were deep in rich soil, and for a moment I considered not answering. This was my time, my morning, my choice of how to spend it. But something made me brush off my hands and walk to the front door. Emily stood on my porch, holding Caleb's hand. Behind them, Daniel sat in his car, windows down, watching nervously. "Grandma?" Emily's voice was uncertain, as if she wasn't sure I'd want to see her. My heart broke and soared at the same time. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hello, Caleb." Caleb, now 11 and trying to look grown up, gave me a shy smile. "Hi, Grandma. Dad said we could visit if you wanted us to." "I always want to see you," I said, kneeling down to their level. "Always. Come in." They followed me into the living room, their eyes taking in the changes I'd made. The space was brighter now, filled with my watercolor paintings from the Arizona workshop, books stacked on every surface, plants thriving in windows that weren't covered by heavy curtains anymore. "Your house looks different," Emily observed, settling onto the couch where she'd sat 100 times before. "I've been making it more mine," I told her. The same words I'd used with Daniel, but without the defensive edge this time. "It's pretty," Caleb said. "It looks happy, out of the mouths of babes." "Thank you, sweetheart. That's exactly what I was hoping for." We talked for an hour. They told me about school, about Emily's gymnastics class that she was paying for herself with allowance money, about Caleb's soccer season that was just starting. I showed them my paintings, and Emily was particularly fascinated by the desert landscapes. "You painted these?" she asked, studying a watercolor of Cathedral Rock with the careful attention of someone who understood that art was a form of magic. "I did. I learned how in Arizona." "You went to Arizona without us?" Caleb looked surprised. "I did. I went by myself, just to see something beautiful." "That sounds lonely," Emily said, but she was still studying my paintings with obvious admiration. "It was the opposite of lonely," I told her. "It was the first time in years I felt completely like myself." When it was time for them to leave, Emily hugged me fiercely. "I missed you, Grandma. I missed you so much." "I missed you too, sweetheart. More than you know." Caleb, still at that age where physical affection felt complicated, settled for a high five, but he held my hand a beat longer than necessary. "Can we come back?" he asked. "You can always come back. My door is always open for you two." After they left, I sat in my garden and thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses bad behavior or enables continued abuse, but the kind that recognizes when someone has genuinely changed, when they've learned to value what they almost lost. Daniel had called 3 months earlier, not asking for money, not proposing managed visits, just apologizing, really apologizing. He'd been in therapy, he said. Individual therapy to understand how he'd learned to see relationships as transactions, couples therapy with Natalie to rebuild their marriage on healthier foundations. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he'd said during that phone call. "I don't even expect you to want a relationship with me anymore. But I needed you to know that I finally understand what I did to you, what we did to you." "And what was that?" I'd asked. "We took your love and turned it into an obligation. We made you feel guilty for having needs of your own. We treated you like a resource instead of a person. And then we blamed you when you finally said enough." It was the conversation I'd waited 35 years to have with my son. "The kids ask about you every day," he'd continued. "I've been honest with them about why you're not around. Age-appropriately honest, but honest. They understand that Mommy and Daddy made mistakes that hurt your feelings." "What did you tell them?" "That sometimes when people love each other, they can still hurt each other if they're not careful. That we weren't careful with your feelings, and that you needed space to heal. That love doesn't mean accepting being treated badly, even by family." Even now, sitting in my garden months later, I was proud of him for that explanation. It was the lesson I'd most wanted Emily and Caleb to learn, that love should elevate you, not diminish you. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Margaret, checking in on me as she did every few days since she'd become not just my neighbor, but my closest friend. "How did the visit go?" she asked without preamble. "Beautifully. Perfectly. They're such wonderful children, Margaret. Despite everything, they're growing up to be thoughtful, loving people. Like their grandmother," she said warmly. "I don't know about that, but I'm trying to be the kind of person they can look up to. The kind of woman who knows her own worth. Speaking of which, how's the painting coming along?" I looked through my kitchen window at the easel I'd set up on the back porch, where a half-finished watercolor of my roses waited for afternoon light. Slowly but joyfully, I'm learning that progress doesn't have to be fast to be meaningful. Wise words. "Are you still planning the Tuscany trip?" "September," I confirmed. "A month-long art intensive in Italy. Can you believe it? At 68, I'm going to be a student in Tuscany. I can absolutely believe it. You're becoming the person you were always meant to be." After we hung up, I made lunch and ate it on my back porch, watching clouds drift across the Chicago sky. My life looked nothing like what I'd expected at this age. I was alone, but not lonely. Independent, but not isolated. Free, but not unmoored. The doorbell rang again around 3 o'clock. This time it was a delivery, a package with my name written in careful cursive. Inside was a photo album, handmade, with Grandma's adventures written on the cover in Emily's artistic lettering. The pages were filled with copies of my travel photos from Arizona, printouts of the paintings I'd shared on social media, even a copy of the newspaper article about the local art show where I'd displayed 3 pieces. The last page had a note in Caleb's handwriting. "Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to be brave." I sat on my front porch and cried happy tears while reading every page twice. That evening, as the sun set behind my neighbor's trees, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the woman who'd stood in her doorway on her 68th birthday, listening to her daughter-in-law tell her to get out, the woman who'd discovered that her love had been treated as manipulation, her generosity as obligation, her presence as inconvenience. That woman had been broken, but she hadn't been destroyed. From her ashes, someone new had emerged. Someone who knew the difference between love and exploitation. Someone who understood that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary. Someone who had learned that you could love people deeply while refusing to accept less than you deserved. I thought about all the women my age who might be listening to this story, who might be recognizing themselves in my journey. Women who'd spent decades measuring their worth by how much others needed them. Women who'd confused being used with being loved. Women who'd never learned that their own dreams mattered as much as everyone else's emergencies. I pulled out my phone and called Daniel. "Mom?" His voice was surprised but pleased. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," I said. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For bringing the children by today. For the therapy work you're doing. For learning to see me as a person instead of just a resource." "Mom." His voice was thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry it took me this long. I'm so sorry I had to lose you to finally understand what I had. You didn't lose me, Daniel. You found me. The real me. The person I am when I'm not trying to earn love by giving up pieces of myself. I like this version of you," he said quietly. "I like seeing you happy. I am happy. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely, authentically happy." After we hung up, I sat in my garden as darkness fell and fireflies began their nightly dance. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the city, carrying people toward destinations unknown. I thought about all the places I still wanted to go, all the paintings I still wanted to create, all the books I still wanted to read. I thought about the woman I was becoming and the adventures that still awaited me. At 68, I was finally blooming. And if you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in my pain, if you've been giving and giving until you disappeared, if you've been accepting less than you deserve because you were afraid of being alone, let me tell you something. You are worthy of love that doesn't cost you your dignity. You are worthy of relationships that add to your life instead of draining from it. You are worthy of being seen, valued, and respected for who you are, not what you can provide. It's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to remember your worth. It's never too late to bloom. Have you ever lived through something like this? Or do you know someone who has? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this message resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Let's help this reach someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that they're not asking for too much, and that they deserve so much better. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is remember that you matter too.